One of the most important things in understanding why the Reformation came about was understanding the printing press. I know, I talked about the printing press and Gutenberg and movable type last time, but I have to go back to it again because it's one of the reasons the Reformation is possible. The corruption in the church is a big deal, particularly the indulgences, but corruption in the church was nothing new. There had been numerous reforms, repairs within the church, and most of those repairs were internal. What made the Reformation so different? The printing press. Up to this point, any changes in church life were internal. It was, well, when I was a kid, my mom always used to tell me, you don't talk about family stuff to people outside the family. Yeah, that was the church up till the days of the Reformation. It wasn't a matter of outside demand for reform as much as it was internal demand among the officials of the church. However, two big things began happening in the early 1500s. Number one, the printing press came around, making books affordable. Prior to the printing press, all books were hand-copied, and books were worth, well, in today's modern money, a single book would cost you at least $5,000, and they would range up into the millions of dollars. The printing press brought that cost down to where it was affordable to people of the middle class. And, number two, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire, also known to us as Germany. In Germany, there was a strong merchant economy. Many small countries, called duchies usually, ruled by a local merchant ruler. And those merchants, those middle-class people, were well educated. The printing press only added to that sense of education and the sense of independence. Here we go with human choice and humanism again. That independence actually gave these people an interest and a sense that they had the right to be educated and to know how to read and write. Now the problem was, with so many people knowing how to read and write, wanting to read books and learning languages like Latin in order to be able to read, the actual parishioners, the audience in churches began to change. In many locations, particularly in Germany, the parishioners, the people sitting in the pews, were as well educated and in many cases better educated than the dude standing in the pulpit. By the way, on your screen, that picture, Doohickey, that funky looking little thing with a rounded dome on top of it over there, that's a pulpit. In the 1500s, preachers actually stood in an elevated little platform with a railing around it and usually a cupola on top of it. That actually was the pulpit in the church. That's why there's actually a flower called Jack in the Pulpit, go Google it, which has a shape very much like that. And you wonder, why? Pulpits don't look like that. Well, they did in the 1500s. Now, these preachers, these priests, were not well educated. They had been trained in the basics. Many of them were still illiterate. Yeah, I said illiterate. Not only had they never read the Bible, but most of them couldn't read at all, and they really couldn't read Latin. They were saying the Mass in Latin phonetically. They actually had no clue what they were saying in church services. They had simply been taught the words phonetically, and they were repeating what they had been taught. This was frustrating, humiliating for the people sitting in the pews, a lot of whom spoke Latin. They knew when the priest mispronounced things. They were better educated than the guy teaching them, and they got very frustrated with this, partially because their version of a sermon in the 1500s was maybe a 2 or 3 minute, what they called a homily, a very brief morality lesson, something that only took a few moments. The people sitting in the pews wanted to actually be taught. They wanted to learn something. So there began to be a greater and greater demand to bring in celebrity preachers, not your local priest, another guy who the merchants actually would hire, pay money, to bring in an intelligent, well-trained preacher who would then teach a lesson. something that took a little bit longer. It changed the format of church services. It changed the format of the Mass because, thanks to the printing press, better educated people in the pews wanted a better educated person teaching them. Now, into this environment where you have better educated people demanding to be taught, you have books circulating, people are better educated, and you have people who are intensely aware of the corruption in the church, the lack of education in the church, the ignorance. Into that environment, we bring a young German man named Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther comes from what we would call Germany, what they would call the Holy Roman Empire. And Martin Luther is actually the son of a self-made man. His dad is a miner. His dad owns a mine. And his dad starts out as a little podunk nobody, and he works his way up the food chain to own the mine and be doing pretty well. Here we go with the idea of humanism again. We've left the chain of being partially behind, and there is this sense that human beings can make something of themselves. Luther's dad wants Luther to have all the advantages of what he worked for. So he ends up sending Martin Luther off to school. Martin Luther is an intelligent kid. He learns well, but Luther has an interesting personality. How do I say this? Luther is a extremely paranoid guy with massive personal fears and superstitions. Luther is still mentally very much stuck in the Middle Ages. He's scared of everything, and he has a massive guilt complex, all that stuff that we talked about with people believing that they had to earn good deeds into heaven and they had to confess or ask for forgiveness for the bad things they did or the things that they forgot to do. That's Luther. Luther lives in constant terror of screwing up his confession, of making mistakes, and so on. One night, as Luther's on his way home, or at least this is the story that Luther tells, one night as Luther's on his way home, a terrible thunderstorm blows up. Now, Luther, being a superstitious, paranoid guy, assumes that the thunderstorm shows the anger of God. He's sure that he's done something wrong, he's terrified, and to make things worse, as he's on his way home in this thunderstorm, thunder and lightning blows up, and a lightning bolt hits a tree just to the side of the road that Luther's walking on. Now, for you and I, we go, dude, it's lightning. It's a tree. It's the tallest thing in the landscape. Duh. We know what happened. Luther doesn't live in that mental world like you and I do. Luther sees the lightning fork down from the sky, hit the tree at the side of the road, and he goes, holy crap, God's mad at me. He's trying to kill me. Ah! Luther promptly drops to his knees and he prays to the saints and he says, I swear that if my life is saved, if you spare me, I will become a monk. Luther doesn't die. Now, Luther doesn't really want to become a monk. I mean, this is not Luther's goal in life. The thing is, think of it this way. Luther's already paranoid about God being mad at him. Luther's already afraid that God is out to zap him one. Luther just swore to God that if he survived, he'd become a monk. Luther kind of has to become a monk because he's afraid if he doesn't, he breaks his promise and then God really will hit him with a lightning bolt. So Luther becomes a monk. Luther's dad is not happy. This is not what Luther's dad wanted him to do, what he wanted him to be when he grew up. But Martin Luther does become a monk and he becomes a very successful monk. He's a very intelligent guy, well-educated, studies hard. The only thing is, Luther continues his utter paranoia. We know for a fact. Luther still continues to go to confession as a monk, only it's even worse because he's still terrified that he's done something he doesn't remember to make God mad. Seriously, no joke. Luther goes for 5-hour confessions. Luther keeps a list. He makes a list of absolutely everything he thinks he's done wrong, he might have done wrong, he forgot to do. He takes this list with him, and he stays in the confessional for 5 to 6 hours. Now, we do not know this, but I swear, I can imagine the monks, the priests, standing outside and seeing Luther coming to confession and going, oh, crap, not him again. No, not that guy. Luther has a lot of problems, a lot of guilt. He really struggles with the question of whether or not God can forgive him, how God can forgive him, whether or not people can really do enough good deeds to get into heaven or not. Luther, for a while, actually comes to the conclusion that you can't actually do enough good deeds to get into heaven, and it's decided already whether you're going to get to go to heaven or not. And Luther decides that since he's such a bad person, he knows he's not going to get into heaven, but he thanks God anyway for actually helping him to understand that he's not going to heaven, and he tries to be a good person anyway. Luther has issues. He continually struggles with this, and he actually manages to be so capable, so well educated, that he actually becomes a college professor teaching at a Benedictine college in Germany, the Holy Roman Empire. Now, Luther himself gets very involved in the Reform movement, and part of his reforms actually start when Luther, in reading through the Bible, runs into a verse in Romans that changes a lot of his viewpoint and a lot of his opinion.